the doom at the door. You will fail. Starfire. The Wildwood's power is mine. The beginning is nigh. So long as you know me, I will always exist. One. Hear the grey winds. Thought by thought, destiny unwinds. We tear. Earth the veil. The fourth edict already burns for your world. Your affliction upon her will soon be erased. Tainted morality, coursing through time to find you. Acquiesce, mortal.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to another update to the Archmage Stormweaver. And I have to say, I thought I was going to be just working on a full guide, but there was a big enough change I made yesterday, and it made a really big impact to the character. Mainly, I roughly doubled the DPS of the character from what we did have, I think, about a 60k tooltip the day before. Now we have 118,000. And really, this comes down to upgrading a bit of my jewels, basically getting more efficient damage jewels. I should have these imported into the planner now with percent crit chance, crit multi, spell damage, a lot of those, and a fairly substantial tree change in that I decided to drop the block nodes while using Mahuadals. The reasoning is these nodes are stronger the better block you have on the shield, and weaker the worse block you have on the shield. So for example, with a 40 block shield, these block nodes take us to 60 block, versus a 25 block shield, these block nodes take us to 36. So it's the difference in getting 11 block chance and like 20 block chance, almost doubling the effectiveness of these nodes. And of course, the back node here scales with the amount of block we have. For example, if we have 60 block, this is 60% damage, whereas if we have 36 block, it's 36% damage, almost half the value. So essentially, what I decided is, if you have a Mahuadals, or if you're going for full DPS, which would be a focus, this is probably a bit more efficient tree. Just so you know, I updated the planner for these, for this information specifically. If you check out the planner, I have done an update here where you can see a block setup versus a Mahuadal or focus setup, as well as I have updated the Act 5 to 6 early map tree versus the old tree, because I've decided another thing that I noticed, which is this node, this set of nodes over here is extremely powerful. I didn't even know how good these nodes were. This node is apparently 20% damage, and 30% damage with 12% crit chance. These are actually super efficient. And it was enough for me to realize, okay, it's probably more efficient if we go with this sort of pathing here. This is our current tree where we path up the middle, and then we come back over to this area by going up through this way, thus getting us closer to being able to path over to here. It also allows us to go for our weapon set to get more of the curse nodes, which essentially gives us a bit more curse effect if the curse gets through half of its duration, as well as it turns the curse into what is effectively an instant cast. Look how fast this thing goes off. You don't even see it, but it does curse the enemies. If you looked at the clips earlier of all those bosses I killed, I had conductivity on them, or on most of them. Some of them I forgot to press the button, but anyways, You know, normally how you cast a curse, it has a delay and then it blows up. With these nodes, it is instantaneous that the curse applies. And you can't see it because it's literally not, I think it's a bit bugged that it's not even showing the animation. But this conductivity curse is just instantaneous. So even if you have a boss that like moves around, it will apply. So that's one of the advantages of having the tree change be over this way, is because we can afford to do our secondary weapon set with these extra nodes as well, because we don't have to do the long pathing here. And it saves on those passive points for the weapon set. Technically, we have 6 extra passives, which I might end up, by the time we get to the guide, figuring out a more min-max way to utilize these, but I haven't really thought of that just yet. So, I went through and I updated the trees. The Act 1 through Act 3 and 4 is basically the same. I still think this is the most efficient early game of just getting this early damage, and I definitely recommend sticking to this. But that being said, if you found yourself using the Act 5 to 6 tree, the old tree before I recommended this new updated version, which paths through the middle, I kept this here as basically an archive example if this is where you're currently on in the tree, to let you have something to look at. But I would recommend swapping it over and working on respecing towards this tree I have here. And eventually, in about a week from now, I'm going to delete this from the guide because I don't want people to be using it. I think it's a bit suboptimal. Basically, the idea is Act 3 to 4, you start doing this pathing. And then once you've allocated all these points, then you start working on a pathing where you go up through the middle and over around. And once you get that line connected, you can then effectively unspec out of all of these nodes and then do the pathing where you go over, up here, get the mana nodes, up through here, and get this important stuff here. That's how it works when you're making that swap. It's basically, from this point, you have like 10 points or so where you're just not really getting additional power, but you're setting yourself up to do the respec to this area here. Now, this has more passives than you'll be able to do early. This kind of combines the early maps with the Act 5 and 6 passives, and I'm just kind of a rough estimate here, but hopefully it gives you a good idea of what areas of the tree you need to go to and when you need to go to them. All right, so that covers why we have a block setup versus a Mahuatl setup. The primary recommendations I have for you is rare shields with block, very good early. Mahuatls and a good focus are both fairly expensive, so I wouldn't recommend swapping to this until you can afford a decent one, because ultimately block setup should be tankier. And I don't recommend swapping to Mahuatls until you have enough carry DPS to supplement the fact you're not going to have as much damage avoidance, if that makes sense. Right now, our character is so well geared that we just essentially one-shot everything, and it doesn't really matter too much. And the only things we get hit by right now are some boss mechanics, and we're tanky enough that the boss mechanics can't really one-shot us. And because they can't really one-shot us, and we have enough faster start of recharge and recharge rate, for the most part, it's just stuff's become trivial at this point with our level of gear. That being said, when you're on the earlier versions of the tree and you're not one-shotting everything and you're going to get more swarmed and ganged up on, that block really comes in handy for avoiding death. So that's kind of my recommendation there, is I still think the block is very good early on, but later when you start to get more min-max gear and you can just basically kill the monster before it even gets a chance to hurt you, then the block becomes less important, and that comes with either having a Mahuatls or a very good focus. Speaking of Mahuatls versus focus, I did compare the two. I had somebody in my stream near who has probably some of the best Archmage gear on the server. I think he's at 9k mana. He's doing a pure DPS setup where he isn't even using Everlasting Gaze. He's going pure DPS. His setup, I tried his focus out, and it was roughly about 15% more damage than Mahuatls, but it lost us about 1200 mana, and it lost us our block chance. Personally, I think this is just better compared to his pretty good focus. He had a +2, 200 ES, 170 mana, crit chance, mana regen focus. I felt like this is still objectively just a better option for those additional defenses. But that being said, his focus wasn't perfect, and it could have been better. It could have had cast speed instead of mana regen. It could have had a higher crit chance roll. It could have had like a T1 spell damage roll. There's going to be a point where the focus is strong enough where it is justifiable to drop this. At 15% more damage, I don't think it's worth it. But if it starts becoming 40% more damage, if you have like a mirror tier focus, then I think it's worth it. So that's my current thought process on Mahuatls versus focus, and giving you some context of how much it changed my character setup. So yeah, that's the idea there. This is still going to be a bit better defensively. It's kind of like a hybrid choice in between block, which is much better defensively, and focus, which has no block. And so it kind of falls in the middle. Another thing I want to mention is I was talking about Nier doing a full DPS spec. I've mentioned this a lot of times. If you wanted to go full DPS, you could drop Everlasting Gaze entirely. You could drop your ability to deal with stun, and you could invest all the nodes you have in ES into pure damage. I am probably going to showcase a setup like this for people that are curious about it, because it does have a purpose. There are certain things where if you have enough DPS, you can just do the content faster. For example, let's say you're farming you're doing a boss farmer where you're just putting in fragments and you're just going in, you're one-shotting the boss and you're leaving. Stuff like that, just full DPS is maybe more important, just being able to one-shot the boss really quick and move on. So I do think I want to actually make another update video for that, and I'll have a separate tree setup for it. Essentially, the main difference between what we have here and that setup, it's literally going to be one thing. Well, technically two things. It's going to be a different amulet, and it's going to be a different tree. So what I'll do to support that is I will set up a part of the guide. I will set up a separate tree, which is a DPS tree, just to showcase you, and I'll have the video obviously showcasing the setup with the full DPS, and that's the plan for tomorrow. And then after that, I think I'll make the comprehensive guide. I just want to make sure I'm covering all my bases. As for the tree we have now, I don't think I'm going to change it much more. This, to me, I believe is quite efficient. There's a few things you could change in terms of like if you're going full DPS spec, not specing ES nodes, but we're gonna have an example of that tomorrow. And then technically, if you wanted to drop some ES, you could go more ES here as well. But for the most part, I am quite confident in this tree now. I think we've refined it very well. I think you're gonna have a hard time making this a bit more efficient, and I wish you the best of luck. I'm sure there's some things you might like more for different utility and whatnot, but so far from my experience, this is quite efficient. One little thing I have not tested, which I am curious about testing, is these nodes right here, which give additional chain. I don't know if this works with Spark. Technically, it says lightning skills, and Spark is a lightning skill, so I feel like it should work with it should work with Spark. But at the same time, it's also just like it feels like it might be too good to be true to have an additional chain for just 4 points. And also, I have no idea how I could realistically test that. When I shoot out Spark, I shoot 20 projectiles. My eyes cannot keep track of that at all. If I have an enemy here, and I shoot it out, I don't know how on earth I'm going to be able to tell if there's a spark going and chaining from one enemy to the other. I'm just not going to be able to keep track of it. I think even if I froze and frame by framed it, I'd have a hard time telling if I'm actually getting that additional chain. So that's something I kind of want to figure out, but I'm not really sure how to, is looking into this additional chain. And another thing I should say that I still am not fully decided on is double shock exposure versus elemental storm. Today I was trying out double shock and exposure. It's pretty good DPS. I hopefully will try to test this on stream today if I can remember to get around to it, which is to test elemental storm versus this, or even a hybrid setup which involves doing elemental storm with just 2 points, maybe dropping the exposure node and then keeping double shock. That might be the ticket. I'm not really sure. I'm still working through the ideas in my head to try to figure out what makes the most sense. So yeah, anyways, that's what I have been working on or looking at and considering. Hopefully you guys enjoy. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. This has been the update to the Archmage character. We're closing in on the final things I can test out and fine-tune on this character. And hopefully you guys will like the DPS video I'm going to make tomorrow and the guide subsequently to follow. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.